We are live for episode 31. I am currently waiting for Jonathan to log on, so you guys just get to hang out with me for a little bit. Episode 31 is going to be Jonathan Hill of iPardalis. I made the little blurb for Facebook and YouTube that shows up with the episode and talked about the multitude of different things that Jonathan is doing that I was very interested to hear about. I think it's going to be really cool. He has actually been on the Chameleon Academy podcast just recently, talking about individually raised Panther Chameleons, and that is a practice that he is a part of, which I think is really cool. And then on his website, he has genetic studies being done with the different localities of Panther Chameleon, which is a really interesting subject that I really liked what he was doing. Social media, Instagram, all that cool stuff. Panther Chameleons are beautiful, of course. And he has great setups, and the individual raising was a really cool way to do things with the breeding. So I was really interested to hear that in general. And as I was doing more research on him, when I went to his website and found those genetic studies, I knew I had to talk to him. So I can't wait to hear more about that, which is really cool. I actually am rocking my shirt that I just got from Wellspring Herpetoculture. Another Roy was a few episodes ago and is doing killer work. I wanted to make sure I mentioned that I hurried up and put this shirt on before I started the episode because I wanted to mention to everybody. He just put on his Instagram a reel of his Marmoratus lizards eating the berries that are growing naturally from the anthurium plants that are growing in his enclosure. That's insane. That's the goal, right? Like, he has a super just amazing setup, well planted, well lit, all the cool things that we talked about before. And then those plants are doing so well that they're flowering, producing fruit, and just doing well as far as horticulture goes. And then the animals that he's keeping in that enclosure are then feeding on the fruit being produced. Like, that is bioactive. Like that. I mean, that's perfect. That's awesome. And then he, it said in the post that he was hoping to finally get it on video, that he'd seen it a few times and never been able to record it for folks. And so now he was able to do that. And he also made a note to say that the feeding response was better with those berries than it was with store-bought berries. So he was already aware of the fact that they would eat the fruits. And so he had been trying other things just as a part of their diet as a keeper. And then he made the observation that they actually do better with those plants in the enclosure, which I just was amazed by that. So he actually was one of the first people to comment when I made the post about the episode. And so maybe we'll see him here in the chat and pick his brain a little bit. I know hearing Jonathan speak when he was on the Chameleon Academy podcast, he also uses dragon strand cages, which I thought was really cool. Bill Strand is the host of the Chameleon Academy podcast, and he's made a whole set of chameleon enclosures that are kind of hybrid and have a really interesting take on how to do those different things. And there is Jonathan. Let's see if we can get him in.
Hey, Bo.
What's up?
Not much. How you doing?
Sorry, I was super late getting you the link. I looked right at that and just didn't do it this afternoon. And Adam was like, I wonder why that dude hasn't messaged me. Well, he didn't message me. I didn't send him anything. That's why he didn't message me.
No, it's all good.
I was just talking you up off of the little episode blurb that I had made after hearing you speak on the Chameleon Academy podcast and different things, how you individually raise Panther Chameleons. You have a bunch of different localities. Your website has genetic studies based on those localities. And then you were talking to Bill and the other episodes and had a million different other insights as far as chameleon go. So yeah, there's bunches of things to talk about.
Yeah, man. I'll say though, I do specialize in the Ambulobe locale.
Okay, cool.
And specifically the yellow body phenotype. So that's mostly what I focus on.
So looking at the different genetics and stuff that your website highlights, and just the multitude of panther chameleons that are available in the hobby,
Yeah.
why? I mean, other than the obvious with the picture that you sent me, because they're ridiculous looking.
So
Um,
cool.
what?
Yeah.
Why'd you go that way when you have all of these choices? Do you just prefer that color palette, or
Yeah, and well, so there are just so many cool locales out there, and I think there's enough space just in the one species and all the locales for everyone to pick their favorite and go have fun. So that's the thing that drew me to the species at first. What drew me to the yellow specifically is I just like the way that um, it highlights the bars. So whatever the bar color is, that yellow background with a nice contrast on the bar is just one of my favorite looks. I think there's other locales and color combinations where you get a similar effect, where you have just really high contrast between the two. Um, and if you focus on cleaning up one, then you can get a huge benefit, as far as the way how clean it looks, and how nice those animals can be. So um, I I just part of the reason I went with the yellow over some of the other options was because I had heard a lot of stories about people acclimating and having difficulty acclimating wild caught specimens. Um, and when you're in other locales, especially some of the smaller locales like a Nosy Mizio or Ankefi, um, you're going to have to do some wild caught acclimation work. Um,
okay?
you're going to have to be familiar with parasitology to be able to manage the parasites to really have success in some of those other locales. And when I started out, I just knew that I didn't have that background, and so I wouldn't be the best person to be trying to acclimate some of those animals. Whereas
Okay.
with the yellow bodies, there's enough really good projects out there with people doing great work that you can kind of stand on the shoulders of giants and get lots of good bloodlines in and have a great project going. So
So that's pretty much a perfect answer. No, so like when I listen to you guys talk with Bill, that that really stuck out to me. I, of course, just like most of the folks that I have on here as one of my guests, I have been social media stalking you and watching all your super cool stuff on Instagram. And chameleons, panthers in particular, are wonderful for that because of the the color palette and everything.
yep,
Um, what I what I noticed from the interview with Chameleon Academy was you are very pragmatic in your approach, and which is I think is a great trait to have. And when you like you talked about individually raising babies,
yep,
and it just it the way that you state it of, oh yeah, it works better and it's super obvious, like that's how you should do it. And and then you know almost all all the evidence supports that, and you follow that, and then you were talking about how you slow rolled the build up to your
yep,
business because you knew that there was a pretty serious money investment to buy all those enclosures.
yep.
And it was a very practical approach to things, and I thought that was awesome. And now, is that, especially with the individual raising, like, is that a trial and error thing where you tried the other way and it didn't work, or did you had heard that this was the way to do it, and so you decided to take that path?
So I had done some initial research, obviously before I started my project, and I had read a really good series on the. It was like there was a article that came out that was arguing the opposite, which was saying that group raising results in better feeding responses and growth rates and some of this other stuff, um, that was countered very well by Bill. Um, in one of his blog posts, I think it was in like 2015, 2016 or something like that. And the counter arguments that he made was essentially like, yeah, the one that wins is going to end up having eating problems because it's been trained or acclimated to eat competitively, and so when you provide food later when it's living by itself, it's just going to keep chowing down, and so
Hmm.
you end up with more like eating disorders and obesity problems with those animals that have been raised in groups. So it's not actually good that they have this competitive feeding response. And so he did a really good job, I felt, of countering the argument that was being made in that article. Um, and so I basically had just I had read that back and forth. I liked his arguments. I liked the 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 approach, and then I set out to do that from the beginning.
Okay.
Um, but I will say that in my second and third year, sometimes because of my lack of experience, would end up with more babies than I had infrastructure to handle. And so I do have experience doing group raising. And so when I talk about the success and the difference between individual raising and group raising, it is based on experience. I've been forced into it.
Awesome.
Um, and so now I've gotten it to a point where I'm better at managing, you know, the rate that I'm breeding, the number of eggs that are going down, how fast they're going to hatch, all that. Because with panther chameleons, it's really tricky because their incubation period can be anywhere between 5 to 11 months, and so you could have clutches that are in that 5 to 11 month range, all just hatch at once, and that's often what happens. Um,
Right.
because they get synced up from some slight change in temperature that's going on while you're incubating them all, and then
Hmm.
boom, you've got like 5 clutches when you thought you'd only have one or two, and then you end up in a really bad spot. And so that's something that I think people who are just getting started aren't aren't prepared for. Um,
Right.
and and that's something that I've definitely had happen where you get people call it like double or triple clutched on, and you're you're just like all of a sudden these clutches you thought would be staggered are all coming out at the same time.
For
So
sure.
yep,
So you the picture that you sent me to use as the thumbnail, you were saying is a fourth generation male,
yeah,
and that
yeah.
you are that's that clean yellow look with the bars you're going for.
Well,
Um,
his bars initially were not what I was going for because
okay.
he has red sprinkled in there, which
Right.
is really cool, but not the goal. And so the goal I really would like is as clean of a blue and clean of a yellow as possible. Um, and so but
So
his body is exactly what I want. Yeah, his body is probably the nicest I've seen.
so I have a question on that because I'm not fully up on chameleons enough.
Yeah.
When you're producing babies and you have a project goal in mind,
Hmm.
and how
How do you know what you're
how do
gonna get?
you yeah, well, because so like there's some red in there and then I want more
Yeah.
blue, but I'm happy with my clean yellow. Like to
Yeah.
me it feels like a Rubik's cube and you're going to turn and like, oh, I just lost all my red. You know, like
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
now
No, it's because
you know
they're
him,
polygenic, so
right? So
yeah,
is that now are you looking at girls now and now you're
absolutely,
going
yeah.
for more blue in girls because you have the yellow in him?
From him, yeah. Well,
Okay.
that's one of the things that I've done. Yeah, I've taken some girls that I know have solid blue backgrounds, and mixing them with him. Um, but yeah, you're right. The challenge usually what you're doing is you have to make a compromise somewhere because their colors are so varied. Um,
Hmm.
And what I do often is I'm looking at details. I'm zooming in, looking at the spaces between scales, like every little piece of their body and bar to see actually what's in there. Because um, I'd say 99% of panther chameleons have multiple colors in their body, multiple colors in their bars. And you'll look at them as you zoom out, and from a distance you'll say that's yellow, or it's red, or it's blue. But when you
Okay.
zoom in, you'll see the complexity of what's actually there.
Okay.
Um, and so as you zoom in on stuff, you can start to see when something is more is a lot cleaner than something like another thing, even if at a distance they both look yellow, right? And so what I do is I've been uncompromising on the body thus far, and a little bit more compromising on the bar because it's really tough, if not impossible, to find exactly what you want in every pairing. Um,
Okay.
and then each time trying to make incremental improvements and get lucky on holdbacks, but not just lucky. Make sure that you're holding them back long enough to see what you actually have, because with Panther Chameleons, the they really don't start to show their color or potential until about 3.5 months old. And
Okay.
the reds and some other colors start coming in around 4, 5, and 6 months old. So if you're offloading most of the clutch right at 3 months, then you're gonna miss out on some of the best stuff you have. So that's
Oof.
yeah.
That makes that hard.
Yeah.
That's that's long-term housing, especially if you're more on the business breeding end of things. That's quite a
Yep.
bit.
Yeah. And that puts pressure on the strategy of individual raising, of course, and um, it's definitely part of what you have to think about. So
So, given that, is how does that weigh for you? Are you just going to wait for everybody for 6 months, or have you? Is it one of those things where you can kind of get an eye for it and a
yeah,
better feel? I
you got
guess.
to well. So first, I'll say I have 4, sometimes 5, 6, 7 generations of lineage on every animal that I breed. So I know what's in there, um,
Okay.
from a lineage standpoint. So for some clutches, I'll know the potential is not there. It's for genetic diversity or something like that.
Okay.
And you're pulling in some new genes, knowing that you're searching for a male that's worthy from the genetically diverse clutch, knowing that you're probably not going to hold everything and try to
Okay.
see if there's a diamond in the rough. Like you're just going to try to get one guy that's worthy and going to provide that genetic diversity that you need. And then there's other clutches where this is this has got some serious potential, and you're going to try to hold on to 3, 4 males and possibly as many females, um, knowing that they're the ones that you're going to try to keep. And after having done at least 1 or 2 clutches with the pairing, you've seen the males develop and you've seen the potential in there. That's
Hmm.
when I'll decide on which females I'm really going to hold back, because I've seen all their brothers, right? So once you see the full spectrum of the brothers in a clutch, that's when you know that the females, all the sisters to those brothers, are actually very valuable to the breeding project. Because a lot of clutches, you'll see there's a huge spectrum of results. Some of those results you really don't want to continue, and
Hmm.
those females, then you know all those females, they could have the stuff you don't want. So um, by taking a look at the brothers as you've done multiple clutches with a given pairing, you get a sense probabilistically for which females you really want to continue with. And so, like in um, my third generation, you'll notice I mostly just kept Jude Kako females. Um, Whereas Jude Allah, they threw a bunch of different looks, beautiful animals, just gorgeous ambilobe, lots of red and orange, and just they were awesome. But if you look at the males that I produced from Jude Kako, there were 19 males. 18 of them had exactly the look that I want. Um, and so there was one red bar in the group, but almost all of them were some of the nicest ones I've seen. So I still remember the names of like 6 of them, you know. So like where as they went out to the breeding community, and so that group I then held on to 4 females from that group, and a lot of my 4th gen guys like Papafi, Manga, they're all coming from the females off of that group. So I'm
Oh, okay.
extending the line off with the females that I knew the males had all proven out really nice. And so the way that
Oh.
am continuing the line in different directions is with females to then prove out those females and see um, what's in there. And in what was in Sunny is Papa Fee. So that's that's kind of where he came from. Was
Okay.
knowing his mother's, all of his uncles were some of my favorites. So, but
So
yeah.
Jessica asks, what sort of labeling, documentation, whatever you may use, do you find to be useful for tracking lineage in the animals that you breed and produce? So, because in my head, I'm just imagining like a literal family picture album, and I'm sure that's
Yeah.
not. I mean,
Yeah. Well,
is it just a giant Excel spreadsheet, or what do you?
I actually I use an old ancestry software called Gramps, and I maintain a database of all the animals in there. And what
That's
it does,
super cool.
yeah, it all, like, all of it sounds like you're talking about people, because it's designed for tracking people's ancestry. But
Sure.
um, I just put chameleons in there, and then when the reports come out of the database, so it has a lot of these reporting features.
Hmm.
I wrote uh, some computer scripts to just rename all the language to make it sound like it's talking about chameleons. And then I use that to publish my ancestry reports on the website. So when I get a new animal, I'm not rewriting the whole ancestry report. It's auto generated from the software, and then I run a script to update it. So um,
Whoa.
so it's easy to give a ridiculous amount of detail, and keep track of everything. But so that's the way that I do that. But I also try to collect pictures of all the males that aren't still in my project but came from my project.
Okay.
I have a section in the website called Past Clutches,
Hmm.
where I just document all the males and females that I've produced, so that you can look back at past clutches and see all of the results in there. So um, I've because a lot of what you see is breeders will, and I'm not trying to trash talk anybody, but a lot of people will cherry pick the nicest one and just show you that. Um, when y- when you
Yes.
when you know when you know that there's like 100 others that you want to understand the full spectrum. um, that's part of why I created that section on the website, is just to try to present um, the entire spectrum of potential results from a given pairing, um, so that
So
you're not just looking at the one brother.
Jessica, the answer is kind of what we expected. John is super smart, tech savvy, and it's making really cool stuff and showing up on a website.
Yeah.
That's awesome, dude. That's like I talked about at the start of the episode how I of course found you through social media and all the wonderful pictures, and then went to the website, and it is so massively in depth, um, that I was just super impressed with it, and knew I had to talk to you. Um, and it, I mean, that answer is basically exactly what I thought after looking at your website, in that it does provide an amazing amount of information. It's really cool to hear that you curated it in that way. That's awesome.
Yeah. I
So
mean, I basically just try to use it as a way to keep track for myself, but then everything I know is there. So if
right,
somebody's curious to know, they can just check it out. Um, and the thing I really like about it is sometimes I'll put something out there that I think I know, and somebody will correct me, and I'll say, "Oh, great!" And I'll go in and I'll fix it. And um,
very cool.
that I think is huge. Like, I remember when I first started doing some of the more detailed lineage stuff, Jeremy Booker was on there, and he's a guy that I had purchased an animal from, I don't know, about 4 years ago, and he saw what I posted, and he said, "No, actually, this is the father, and this is the mother," and so he was able to go in there and help, um, correct an error that I had. So
Nice.
that's the other thing I like about putting it up there, is that it's up there for others to see and to check and to correct, so that if a customer comes along, it's been up there for long enough for other people to point out errors and to fix it, so it's not just my personal record.
Right.
So that's,
That is cool.
yeah.
I think that is. that is an extra level. Um, I know on the snake side, Nick Mutton is very similar with lineage and tracking and not just the lineage and tracking, but the willingness to share that information is awesome, but also probably pretty rare. Um, and to
Well,
have it to do it in the format for the website like that is pretty cool, man.
yeah, I've always seen it as it's it's actually turns out to be extremely beneficial to you and people who are either like reticent to share it or to get started on some of that should just take the leap because once they do, they'll see the benefits and they'll realize that it's not as there's really not as many risks I think there are. So
Right.
um,
Well,
that
and I think your willingness to share the way that you have would make a booker willing to, message you or whatever and be like, hey, man, actually, it's X, Y, and Z or what have you.
yep
Because you're obviously already open to the discussion because you're starting it on your end in such a way. So
yeah
yeah, I mean, it just makes it easier to keep it going.
yep
So, and then Anne asks, do you vend at shows? Because you're an
yeah
East Coast guy.
yeah I'm over in Maryland. um, I've been to more shows pre-pandemic.
Sure,
Post
yeah, of course.
post pandemic, I did the Repticon in Baltimore, um, and uh, I may not be allowed at some vending sites in Pennsylvania after some heated discussions about mask mandates. But but so I might not be welcome. But uh, I do attend the the uh, the expos that are nearby.
Okay.
I've been out to White Plains. I think is the farthest. I went up to
Oh, cool.
New York, um, but it's not a regular thing. Partly because uh, when I go to shows, it's more to interact with other vendors, to educate, and to like have fun talking to other people who have similar interests. I usually bring like fully planted enclosures, and people think I'm
Yeah,
selling plants, and um,
very
that
cool.
so. But that's so I usually go and I enjoy it, but I have two young kids, 2 and 4 years old, and so it's tough to know
For sure.
to be out for a weekend. So
No, I get it. I definitely get it. My kids are teenagers now, and it has made a world of difference. Where it's like, oh, NABC's coming up, and they are like, yeah, let's go and get a pretzel and get whatever, walk around for snakes.
yeah,
Um, yeah, as that makes a huge difference. When they were little, I definitely was way more. I think I'm gonna stay home and just change waters because I'm not going out, dragging
yeah.
little kids and yeah, for sure.
But I could
Um,
say when I was at the last Repticon, Brandon Severns, the owner of Busy Bees, was there with his young daughter. She was like 6 months old there, with him and his wife, and he was a real trooper with that. But
wow,
um, yeah, I'd say mad props to him.
for
Um,
sure. Yeah, I
so
don't. I don't know if Teresa would have lugged babies around when we had babies. I don't think she was me down for that.
yeah.
Um, I did want to backtrack. You talked about genetic diversity
hmm
and how you had clutches with that intent, and then clutches where you knew, um, it was game time. This is a line look I'm going for, and
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
And how do you address that? Do you have percentages you're going for? Do you just it's been
Yeah.
a it's been 2 or 3 generations, let's split, or is there a time frame?
Yeah. The way that the general rule of thumb that I use is 6 to 7 generations to the common ancestor. Um,
Okay.
and the reason is because if you have a fatal recessive trait or some recessive trait that you really don't want to persist, um, at about 6 to 7 generations, you're getting close to 1% chance of that fatal recessive or some like recessive that you don't want to pop up. And
Okay.
1% is pretty close to just natural um, natural survival issues that you could see in a clutch. So your your risk from genetic problems is pretty close to um, negligible at about 6 to 7 generations, if it
Okay.
is due to a recessive trait. Um, Now there could be some weird like polygenic combos that result in things that you don't want, which I haven't tried to do the math on, but that it would be different than it would be more like higher than 1%. But yeah, if I started to see some of that in some of the closer related pairings, then I would definitely look into it to try to figure out what the probability is and increase the generations. But
Okay.
um, the general rule of thumb that I use is about 6 to 7, which um, what that means is you're counting the generations on each side. So if you have 3 on each side, that would be 6. If you have 4 on one and 3 on the other, that'd be 7. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm tracing back to the common ancestor and getting that number to figure out if I should do the pairing or not. Um,
Okay.
and uh, so what that also means is you really have to do a good job of selecting an animal that's worth breeding, because it's easy to get to an animal that's off look within 2 generations. Um, so at 3, you're you have to do a good job tracking and make sure you've got the right traits that you want. So it's it puts a little bit more burden on you as a breeder, whereas some people who are willing to do cousins or closer, they're just kind of lazy because you're gonna you know what you're gonna get. So
Right.
the but yeah, I think that's my general rule of thumb. And I do, if I can find animals that have exactly the traits that I want that are entirely unrelated, I'm absolutely going to do that
Okay.
as my preference. So like I have a trio from Arlo, from over at Colorado Chameleons,
Mm-hmm.
and those guys are unrelated to my stuff. And so I've been doing a lot of that with a lot of those combos this year, which I'm pretty excited about.
Okay.
The male that I have named Manjaka, he's he's got great yellows, great blues. He rests green. He looks like a wild type ambilobe. He's one of my favorite breeders right now. So
So I know you said at the start that part of your uh, decision making process when you went locality and the way that you did was whether or not you would have to get wild blood and how you would, deal with that given your skill level at the time.
yep.
Have you progressed to the point where you do use that, or no? Or are you still just using captive bred animals for your choices?
Yeah, I'm still using captive bred. Uh, that trio is an F1 group, so that was why I grabbed them. But in early
Okay.
2020, I started to focus on parasitology. I got a bunch of reference books, um, veterinary textbooks, a microscope, and slides, and um, so I've been doing a lot of fecals myself on all of the animals that I have.
Oh,
Over
wow.
in 2020, I had the goal of doing at least 3 fecals on every animal, and I got really close to it. I didn't I didn't get a couple of my females, but um, I've I've been tracking that and then learning about everything that I find. I started to do a pretty serious quarantine on captive bred animals, and
Okay.
all of that's kind of in preparation for at some point in the future getting a wild caught. But um,
Okay.
but yeah, I was just thinking, if I'm gonna do it, I should probably start on the animals that I have and then work up to it. So
Okay. I'm that makes it. So I have a couple of questions that okay, so do you keep other reptiles besides chameleons?
yeah, I've had snakes since I can remember.
Okay.
Um,
So
Lots of colubrids, all the classics.
I'm trying to
Um,
figure out how to phrase this without
and
sounding rude, but it's probably not going to work.
no,
So,
be rude.
No,
her.
no, not in a negative way.
Yeah,
Maybe,
yeah,
I don't know. Whatever.
yeah,
Um,
sure.
you everything that you are describing, or I guess not really, just the way that you're describing and the way that you talk about your collection and your approach to things is so technical and so detail oriented, and it's awesome. And the amount of information that you are gathering and then sharing with folks, and the the process that you just listed out with the culmination of that whole detailed thing you told me being, oh, with the intent to maybe get a wild caught one, when, like, dude, most people just go on King Snake and buy one. Like, it's not, do you know what I mean?
Uh,
Like,
yeah, no, I
the
know,
your
but
approach is so different than I think what most people are. Like, they're beautiful, they're kind of expensive, but a lot of people impulse purchase them. And
yeah,
chameleons, I feel like, to the casual herper, casual keeper, probably get a bad rap. They don't seem to last that long. They're real expensive, but they're beautiful, and they have
hmm,
people get stuck in they have the insect, uh the system where they just have a bunch of babies and die, and y- you
yeah,
know and then to hear someone like you describe the way that you're doing it is evidence based, information driven, and then you're having awesome success. And it I don't know, that's why I asked if you kept other stuff, is like, so that you of
yeah,
course, if you've kept snakes for a long time, you have context to that, but to realize that your approach is quite different from most folks, but you have such results to show for it. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, I don't think I have a point to that other than to say that is that's I find that very impressive.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I mean, it's what makes it fun to me, because I like to learn, and so I see it as um, an opportunity to explore in a species that I had heard similar things. Like I had heard a lot of people say you get 2 to 3 clutches out of a female and then they crash on you, and I wanted to prove that wrong. Um, so I wanted to see if I could do better. And so I've been constantly trying to improve on female health, female clutch size, female longevity. Um, and with my third female, Alla, I got her to live a long life of 4.5 years, and she gave me 17 clutches. And it's one of the best.
Holy cow.
It's one of the best outcomes I think I've heard. So um, and she was awesome. She was one of my favorite chameleons. But then I lost her to gout later in life, and so I've been reading
Really?
about yeah. So I've been reading about it. Like she started to have some problems in her joints, and that's kind of what caused her to go downhill towards the end of her life.
Okay.
And um, so I haven't had a chance to really get the answer to what can cause it, but um, she'd already gotten to a place where she'd lived well, and she lived long. So, but yeah, I'd like to see if I can figure out what I could do at that point if another female gets to that age and that
Hmm.
stage where she has some joint issues, and see what we
So,
can do.
I mean, the end notwithstanding,
Yeah,
keeping reptiles, with the exception of the few very long-lived species, there's always the end. That's
yeah,
the innate tragedy of owning pets, right?
yeah,
Is that's you set yourself up for that. Um,
yeah,
what, and this is a ridiculously basic question that probably has a very complicated answer, but what do you attribute any specific facet of your approach to what gave you that longevity? Especially, people talk about chameleons in the supplementation routine, the calcium levels and things of that nature. Now, do
yeah.
you think that you Was there something specific in your routine that gave you that female longevity, or do you feel that she was just healthy and you got lucky, good genetics?
It's definitely a combination of things. She's an outlier, but the the approach that I took with my first female, I did not have the same kind of success with, and I used more of like the classic when I first got started. I guess it's almost 7 years ago now, but um, the classic calcium with a like Reptivite multivitamin twice a month.
Hmm.
That's what I used initially, and then with Ala, I switched over to Earth Pro A, um, or calcium and magnesium every fourth feeding, and then started adding Revitalized D towards the end of her life every eighth feeding. Um,
Okay.
the the approach with Earth Pro A supplementation strategy is basically that you're giving a daily dose of calcium, bee pollen, vitamin B, and soluble, just your water soluble vitamins. So
Hmm.
you're not going to OD on that, but you give them that daily so that they can um, make sure that they have the right balance of all those vitamins along with calcium. Um, then then the multivitamin with fat solubles you're only doing every 8 feeding, and if that. Um, and the reason is because some of the older supplements have higher concentrations of vitamin A and D3, which are fat soluble.
Hmm.
And so there's a theory that many people were testing, and I was one of those people, was that we were over supplementing. Um, and so for at least 3 years of Ala's life, I was um, trying to do a less is more approach um, with Earth Pro A and no preformed vitamin A and D3, trying to rely on high quality lights and like a naturalistic approach.
Hmm.
Um, so that's probably part of what helped produce that success, because that was the approach that I used. Um, but but yeah, I did start to see um, some like eye type issues, which is associated with vitamin A deficiencies. Um, Towards the end of 3 years after I'd been doing it for a long time, in
Okay.
in few females. It wasn't in any males. It was always in a female, usually post lay. So like she'd be recovering from laying, and I'd see uh, some slight issue with her eye, like a hard squint. Um, and so uh, that's when I started to add multivitamin and larger meals right after they laid, just to help them bounce back, make sure they get their vitamin A and everything.
Okay.
Um, and that has seemed to help a lot of females. Um, and the thing that I'd say is like one of the same approach doesn't work for every animal. You got to watch. You got to see how they do and adjust, because some females just have a base clutch size that's too high. So when you see that they're laying over 30 eggs, you got to pull back. You got to reduce your heat. You got to feed them less. You got to figure out what you can do to try to help her lay fewer eggs. Um, and so there's a lot of
Okay.
things like that where you're just watching. If I ever see a clutch above 25, I'm going to try to reduce something to try to get the clutch size down. Um, and the that has seemed to help a lot of different females. It's like whether that be giving her less basking, less food, um, the something to try to reduce the inputs and help her produce smaller clutches. So
That's like the most anti-breeder thing I've ever heard.
yeah,
And
but
it,
no, but
and it,
I'll tell you, it's very similar. It's very similar to individual raising, because
100%.
because there's you get longevity, and longevity is amazing, because if you get a female that you can keep her in your project for twice as long, then you can raise up males from other pairings and eventually do a pairing that you otherwise couldn't do. You
Yeah.
you get a lot more value um, out of her. She gets a longer life and a better life. I feel like it's a win-win for sure.
And it is. And I was just being a jerk when I said that.
No, but
Um,
I know what you mean though, because there's a lot of
it
guys who are just thinking like,
right,
I have one cage, I have one female. If I can get
right,
50 eggs, that's a win. Um,
right.
and
But I love that I am a a big evidence based nerd for all kinds of different sciences, and I work in healthcare and do some other things. And
Cool.
evidence based stuff is really driving a lot of things, and it is in all of the different facets that it pertains to my professional life. Um, Evidence based actions are always fighting against, well, this is the way we've always done it, or old Bob taught me how to do this, and I just, if it ain't broke, don't fix it there, kid.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah,
um
I've been doing this for 20 years and my girls never give me more than 3 clutches. I'm like,
right.
well,
And then, and see, but that, I love that because you because you gather that evidence, you keep that evidence, you share that evidence, and have all these results to show for it. It That is the only catalyst that would drive the collective to assume your approach. Because if, which sucks on the breeding side, it sounds very bad, but being able to explain to a person who maybe doesn't care as much or is a little more financially driven or what have you, however you want to categorize that, that it is
hey,
to their benefit to do it the quote unquote right way, because your way is evidence based and analytically driven, but it's also, in my opinion, ethically
yep,
better because it's better for the animal. And
yep.
if you can mate those two things up, of, hey man, it would be better for your bottom line and it's also better for the animal, you can kind of
Well,
bring those people along even if
yeah,
they're not necessarily ethically the same as
e
you.
exactly, yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah. No, I agree. I'm actually a data scientist, so, um,
Oh, that
I
explains so much about all the stuff that you do.
yeah, that's my real job.
Oh,
Um,
cool.
but but yeah, no, so I'm a big believer in open open data because
Yeah,
I think if other people can use your data to do their own analysis, then um, they'll come up with the right conclusion, and
right.
hopefully you can come to a consensus there.
I really love that, because especially, with what's going on now in USARC and all the different things and law changes and stuff, and
Yeah,
a lot of people are, and I've said it before, with the herpeticulture network folks in our group chat, like, sometimes you see people do stuff in herpeticulture and it's like, man, that's why people hate us, or that's why people think we're weird lizard nerds, or like,
yeah,
you're just
yeah,
not doing the right thing, man, and then we
yeah,
have all these different political fights and so on and so forth. But
yeah,
to see that you're doing something like this, and it's very technical and it's for this specific species, and we're doing these things and trying supplementation, and there's a lot of science and data and stuff going on.
yeah,
But then in the nuts and bolts part of it for keeping chameleons and being a chameleon breeder, hey man, this makes you better at that. Also, she lives longer, looks better, ethically, you know, PC viewpoint of things, it looks better, so on and so forth. And
yeah,
it genuinely is the right thing to do. I think in herpeticulture, that's kind of a rare thing that we can combine those two right now. Um, and it's just a really good example of, if we did the right thing, maybe less people would think we were a bunch of weird lizard nerds with tattoos and beards and all this ridiculous crap, and they wouldn't try to ban us in politics. But doing the right thing isn't always financially feasible, and I could make more money just pumping out babies, and they breed like insects anyway, so who cares? That whole garbage
yeah,
of, you have found a way to mate the two up. And I don't necessarily know if that was your intention. It just, you had the right idea and it came to fruition. Um, I don't know. I just think that's awesome. I'm talking in circles to say that I really like what you're doing.
Thanks, man. Yeah, I don't. I mean, I've always, because it's not my full time job. I want to have fun, um,
Sure.
and doing something the right way has always been important because I'm less concerned about the bottom line, but at the same time, I do want it to be sustainable. I want it to be, a successful business.
Right.
Um, uh, but it's not my priority because the way that I've always thought about business is that if you do something that is correct, your customers will buy into what you're doing
Hmm.
and they will support you and you'll be successful. And so you don't really have to worry about the bottom line as much if you take that approach because that passion that you have, that if you share it and other people share it with you, then that's all that matters. The bottom line will come, and um, I think that that's at least how I've always thought about it, especially when you're coming like working with living animals. Um, you could go the puppy mill route and um, just try to pump them out, uh, but no one loves a puppy mill,
Right.
and I wouldn't want that to be my side thing. Like that would be really where like I wouldn't want to be taking away from my family and other things that I could be doing to run a puppy mill. That just sounds terrible. So
Right.
um, that that
Yeah.
that's that's always been the way that I've thought about it.
I like it. So I wanted to try and keep this one to an hour because I know we're kind of after
Yeah.
dinner before bedtime for you. So I did have a question. So you had been a part of the folks who were studying with, vitamin A and different things, and
Hmm.
you were on Community Academy podcast, and you have talked about dragon strand cages and reading Bill's stuff, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And one of the things that Bill talks about quite a bit is he thinks that female panthers are actually really awesome pets, and that they kind of get discounted in the panther marketing side of things because panthers are so heavy on
Vibrant.
the, it's this locality and this is what their dad looks like, and a lot is given to final state of a mature male,
Hmm.
whereas in the herpetoculture pet keeper side, there maybe isn't enough thought process given to females actually are good pets, like not
Yeah.
necessarily project animals but good pets. What
Yeah.
is your thoughts on that?
I 100% agree. Females are more food motivated. Um, so when you're coming to their cage, they're immediately thinking you're going to feed them. Whereas males, you'll often get a few males that are a little bit more cage defensive. Um, so behavior wise, they're much more interactive, much more just kind of focused on that food. Um, and they're smaller. Uh, so they're usually about 50 to 75% the size of the adult male. So they're gonna do better if you have a big cage and you get a female in there. You'll see more natural behavior from her. Um, so it's easier to get her a real big cage because she's not as big. Um, so that's definitely a big advantage. The thing that a lot of people get scared about is eggs, and often I think it's just because people are so focused on the male that they aren't used to thinking about how to set up a cage properly for a female. And so it becomes daunting to think about that. But if people just started with how do you make a good cage for a female, then you'd be fine. It wouldn't it wouldn't be an issue. The other thing is with chameleons in general, one of the big problems I see 1 year on is obesity and overfeeding. And
Okay.
that's true for males. It's also true for females. The consequence for females is worse because you get egg-bound females that have difficulty laying a huge number of eggs. Um, and the if people are aware of that problem, which they should be for both males and females, then they should be able to cut back their feeding for their females to the point where the risk of an egg-bound female is basically nothing. I've never had an egg-bound female, and I've worked with, I don't know, probably about 28 females now.
Wow.
So the the I've also been aware of this as a thing that you want to be thinking about with your girls. You don't want big clutches. So the making sure you're not overfeeding your female goes a long way to making that a goal, an achievable goal of the female being a great pet. And I would argue
Okay.
it's the same for males. It's not like it's something that's unique to females. It's just that they have a bigger consequence um, when they're obese.
Okay. Awesome. I think that is a fantastic way to end this episode. That
So
was insightful, I guess. I don't know how to. That was not a way I would have thought of that. It's a good thing to know. I hope folks bear that in mind. Um, that was awesome, man. Thank you very much. I'm so glad you agreed to come on, and I hope that we can drive more folks to your social media platforms and your website, especially.
thanks, Bill.
Yeah, for sure.
It's
All right.
always a pleasure talking to other herpers, and I really enjoy listening to your show. So
Cool. Thanks, man. All right. Appreciate it, dude.
yeah,
Okay. That was episode 31. Jonathan Hill of iPardalis. I am not at all surprised to find out that he is in data science after seeing his website and hearing his approach. And I have talked about it multiple times in multiple episodes that I love evidence based approaches to things. And the most things that have an evidence based approach then have the results to show for it. And he absolutely is an example of that. That was wonderful. I encourage folks to go check out the Chameleon Academy podcast. Just in general, it's a great source of information. But Jonathan was just on there recently on a few talking about some different topics in the chameleon world of things. That was really good. Thanks for the folks in the chat came asking very specific questions. That was cool because he had some great answers for us. And definitely check out the website with the different localities and stuff and how folks are looking at things like that. Panther chameleons are for a singular species seem to have nearly an endless amount of information that we are still currently gathering about them. It's really fun to dig into. You can majorly go down a rabbit hole, and at the same time, they're beautiful. You know, we're not talking about 10 different brown frogs or something where if you're a nerd like us, you're into it, but it's hard to convince folks it's cool. When you have a blues and yellows and all these beautiful things, it really is a driver for honestly being one of the faces of herpeticulture. And I was so happy to hear that he had talked about his approaches for female longevity and how we were able to combine that with that really is probably the more ethical way to do things, and it's having results in a positive way for breeding. So that was awesome. I'm so glad he agreed to come on, and definitely check out his social media if you just want to go picture crazy looking at Instagram. It's wonderful. That Panther Chameleons are great for that. Don't forget, I started out the episode talking about wellspring herpeticulture as well. Go check out Instagram there, showing the Marmoratus eating berries inside of their enclosure, which had just grown naturally. That is one of the cooler things I've ever seen. Another big evidence based guy, not in the chameleon side of things, but basically the Jonathan Hill for weird snakes and lizards. So that's super cool. I'm glad we're continuing with the trend of um, just good people having positive results. I'm very happy that our group of guests and the way that they come to the show really are following that trend. It's really awesome. Of course, with the little background around me for the Herpeticulture Network folks and Black Box Cages, actually, the guys from the Herpetoculture podcast. I believe Casey Cannon and maybe some other folks will be with myself at the Show Me Reptile show in Marietta, Georgia this weekend, coming up on the 12th. I think we're all going to be there Saturday, and then maybe try to figure out who's going to be there for Sunday. But at least Saturday, we should all be there with the Black Box Cages folks. So that should be cool. So with that, I will see you all again in 2 weeks. Later.